So you see this sutta, the Buddha says that to the ordinary person, worldly states affect his mind. He's swayed by all these, moved by all these states. That's why in Chinese they call these 8 states, Fa Feng, 8 winds, the 8 winds that move a person. So the first pair is gain and loss. Gain and loss, I think most of you know. When you succeed in something or you don't succeed in trying to get what you want, then there is gain and loss. And there are many types of gain and loss. There's a type, for example, for businessmen, it's making money and making a loss. And then perhaps for people at your age, maybe gaining a boyfriend or a girlfriend and not making a loss. And then honor and dishonor. Honor and dishonor are more for people with the ego, the fat ego. Then you're very concerned with honor and dishonor. You want to be a dato, a Tan Sri, what in England they say a sir, or a knight or something. And then praise and blame. Praise and blame, also most people are affected by it. And it starts even from young. Even from young, sometimes our parents praise us, we are very happy, and when they blame us, we try to argue, right? And then happiness and misery. This happiness and misery, as we grow older, and then it affects us more. As we grow older, we see our uncles and aunties getting old, and we see them becoming miserable, our grandparents. And then when they pass away, then you see a lot of people crying. Like for a person like me, being a monk, sometimes I get called to attend funerals because people pass away. And then either they expect a monk to come and do some chanting or come and give a talk. Because we prefer to give a talk. We are not so good in chanting, but there are some monks who specialize in chanting. And then you notice, like for Chinese, when somebody passes away, they keep the corpse in the house for 3 days, or 5 days, or 7 days. And then at the end of that period, when they take out the coffin either to the graveyard or to the crematorium, then you find these people, especially when they start moving the coffin out, these people crying in such a state that is really very moving. They cry so much as if the end of the world, worse than the end of the world. And that's the greatest sorrow we suffer when we see somebody we love very much leave us for good. And in a way, we cry also not only because of that person, also because of ourselves, because we realize that one day we will also grow old, we will also die, we will also have to leave our loved ones. So that is the greatest sorrow. And when you see these people crying so unbearably, sometimes we are also moved to tears. So that is happiness and misery. So these states, gain and loss, honor and dishonor, praise and blame, happiness and misery, they all come about because we have a notion of a self, an ego, an I and mine. If there was no self involved, then we won't cry so much. For example, if it was somebody else's relative that passed away, we would just sort of look at it dispassionately. But it's because it is my mother, my father, my son, my daughter, that we cry so painfully. So, this one, the Buddha is actually like differentiating between the ordinary person in the world and an Aryan. An Aryan is a holy person. There are 8 types of Aryans, eight types. The one who has attained the first path is the Magga. And after that, he attains the first fruition, Phala. And then you have a second path attainer, second fruition attainer, third path attainer, third fruition attainer, fourth path attainer, and fourth fruition attainer. The fourth fruition attainer is also called an Arahant. It's also called an Arahant. Now what's the difference between an Arahant and a Buddha? Anybody know? All Buddhas are Arahants, but not all Arahants are Buddhas. It's just like all doctors are human beings, right? But not all human beings are doctors. Arahant means someone who is liberated from the round of existence. Comes from the word Arahata. Ara and Hatta, 2 words. One word means the spokes of the wheel of existence. The other word means to have destroyed the spokes of the wheel of existence. So an Arahant is one who is liberated from the round of existence. He does not have a notion of a self anymore. So he is not moved. But that also does not mean that he is not compassionate. In fact, the Arahant is the most compassionate person in the world, not the Bodhisattva. The Bodhisattva still has a self. As long as you have a self, you still have that selfishness in you. And because of that selfishness in you, you are not perfect. You cannot give like an Arahant. An Arahant has totally no self. That's one way of saying it. Another way of saying it is, an Arahant sees all beings as his self. So it's impossible for an Arahant to harm any other living being. He sees everyone as part of himself. In fact, the Buddha said, if he wanted to kill an Arahant, he took a dagger, came in front of the Arahant to stab him. He wouldn't cry for help. He'll never cry for help. Because he understands karma. If he understands that he is to be killed because of his karma, he'll accept it. So, the greatest hero is the Arahant. And it's the greatest thing in life to do, to put down your ego. Because that's the hardest thing to do in life. The ego is the one, nature has made it such that we have this ego to protect ourselves. And every living being has this notion of an ego. You see the ant, the mosquito, when the mosquito comes to you, he just wants a little drop of blood from you, a little donation, dharma. But you see him, you get alarmed. Where's this guy? I want to slap him. So, when you try to do that, the mosquito will fly away. Why? Because it fears for its life. So nature has made it such that every living being values its life the most. There is nothing more valuable to a living being than the self. For example, if somebody owed you $1 million, or even owed you all the wealth in the world, when you are about to pass away, you know that you cannot even take 1 cent with you, right? Not even 1 cent. You cannot even take your old stinking shirt with you. So, because of that, you can forgive him if he took all the wealth from you. But if he took your life, you probably want to take revenge. Try to make a vow to kill him the next life. So, life is the most important thing for every living being. That's why in the 5 precepts, the first one is not to kill. So, this ego is inbuilt in every one of us. And it is very difficult. It is totally against our nature to sacrifice the self. Right? It's only you are only able to do it sometimes when you feel, like for example, your son has fallen into the river. and you're willing to risk your life to save your son because it is my son, right? So, that may be a different body, but it's still associated with that I because it's that mind. But to totally give up that I, that ego, is the most difficult thing to do. Every living being in the world, because it survives, it survives at the expense of others. We're all trying to survive. Every living creature in the world is trying to survive. And very often it survives at the expense of other creatures. For example, you look at animals. They eat each other, right, alive. Why? Because everyone is trying to survive. Actually, human beings also do it, but in more subtle ways. We compete with each other in business, etc. And then if you succeed, another person loses out. So, in a way, you are also harming him. Maybe not to the extent of taking his life, or even maybe to the extent of taking his life, but in a more subtle way. Sometimes people lose out in business, they become bankrupt, and they commit suicide. So when they commit suicide, it's actually somebody else taking their life, right? So, that is why the Arahant is the greatest person in the world, to be able to give up that ego, so that he is no more a being that is a source of threat or a source of harm to other beings. So these 8 worldly states, as long as we have not given up that ego, that self, we are very much affected by these states and other states. It's only when we are able to lessen our ego that we are less affected by these states. And then when we totally give up the ego, then these states don't affect us at all. I think there's nothing much else I can say about these 8 worldly states. Do you have any questions concerning this or any other thing?